Next week, Professor Emily Vermeule, who is Zimari Radcliffe Professor of Classics and Archaeology, will speak to you about some of the Homeric hymns. And if for that you could read the hymn to Demeter, the hymn to Apollo. There are two of them, a shorter one and a longer one, and you might just as well read both of them, the hymn to Pythian Apollo and the long hymn to Apollo, and the hymn to Aphrodite. Those are the ones that she will cover. Demeter, Apollo, and Aphrodite. And you will learn something about the cult of these goddesses and God, and a good deal more. So next week, Professor Vermeule. Then I will return and we will use after that the Persian Shahnameh, selections from it which will be available. The selections which are concerned with the birth of Rustam and his life up through his famous battle with his son Sora. And then we will end with the Daredevils of Sassoon, the Armenian epic of David of Sassoon. This morning, before we break for the Thanksgiving holidays, which I think all of us are rather looking forward to, I know I am, I'd like to make a few comments on the last part of the Odyssey about the return of Odysseus and his recognitions, and a few remarks that I think may be helpful in understanding some of the things which are going on in the last part of the Odyssey. We pick up the story where we find Odysseus leaving the hut of Eumaeus and on his way to his own palace now in Ithaca. And on the way, you recall that he is mocked by a goatherd, Melanthius. This is the beginning of a series of mockings that will gain in intensity as he gets into his palace and into conflict with the suitors. I spoke last time of the mocking in connection with the incident in Phaeacia where Sea Reach mocks Odysseus. This seems to be this whole series of mockings which is persistent in all of the stories of this kind of return. And those of you who know that Beowulf will find that even in the Anglo-Saxon Beowulf, one finds a strange kind of mocking in the Hall of Heorot. This kind of mocking seems to be associated with the question of identity. Who are you? How strong are you? Are you back really from the other world? And do you still have the strength of older years? So it is an important element, and as I said, it increases in intensity as Odysseus gets with the suitors in the manor, M-A-N-O-R, where he lives. As he reaches, he's had one recognition, that of his son Telemachus, which was brought about by Athena you remember there was no question of signs or scars or anything of that sort, but a real declaration, I am your father, Odysseus, and the glorification of him. This was the first recognition. And the second one occurs as he reaches his palace. And it is a touching recognition. You recall the recognition by the old hunting dog, Argos, who at the last, as his last gasp, as it were, wags his tail in recognition of his master's return. The dog by instinct knows his master. So he here is the second of the recognitions on his return. The third takes place as the old servant Eurycleia or Eurycleia is given the task of bathing Odysseus. And there is a slip which Robert Fitzgerald in his notes to this passage makes comment on, and I think you will find that the comments of Robert Fitzgerald in the epilogue are many of them very interesting and worthwhile, and particularly these last passages which he analyzes to some extent, and I shall return to that. But now Eurycleia recognizes her master. She's been told to bathe her master, and then there is a sort of double take. Well, your master, he is of about the same age as your master, and you could really make something of that, as Fitzgerald does, that Penelope recognizes or has recognized Odysseus at this point. This is a debatable question, and I would like to come back to that for a moment. But the history of the scar is given, and so the third of the recognitions takes place with the old nurse, Eurycleia, who had known the boy Odysseus since his birth. So the recognitions of the man begin to pile up. And we see that this part of the Odyssey begins to be expanded by Homer. He has this picture of the return to the manor, to the palace in his mind, and he elaborates on it in great detail. He elaborates on it to such a degree that he puts off two things. And I think this is possibly what Homer has done. He has put off the final recognition by Penelope and the recognition by his father, Odysseus' father, Laertes, until the very end. I think this explains why you don't have a direct recognition of Penelope earlier. Her recognition is a very special one, and it has to be put at a particular place in the story. Homer elaborates everything in between there, and he can't have Penelope recognize her husband until this point that is reached much later, after the killing of the suitors. So he takes his time about elaborating the incidents that take place in the hall. This is a little like, I think it may well be that this is Homer's technique here. It is a little like what you have in the Iliad, where in the Iliad, you recall in Book 8, Zeus says that Achilles will not return. Remember that, we went over it in great detail, that Achilles will not return to the fighting until they are fighting over the dead body of Patroclus. He puts off the return of Achilles, and in the same by elaborating other things in between. And it is a technique which is similar to that in the Odyssey, where he puts off, although he knows exactly what's going to happen, he puts off the incident, a very special one, like the return of Achilles, and elaborates a great many other things in between. And so the pictures become more and more expanded in the hall. There occurs in Book 20 a series of omens and visions. You may recall the frightening aspect which is given to the suitors, the blood and the visions, the prophecies of what's going to happen to them. Here we see the hitchhiker that Telemachus had picked up at Pylos on his way back from the Peloponnese. We see Theoclymenus playing a particular role in prophesying and in interpreting dreams and omens. This is something that I think is worth dwelling 2 minutes on, because here is an element that is perhaps foreign to you. We are not accustomed to these omens and the interpretation of omens and of dreams, but this was a very important part of ancient belief. And I think you have to realize that this was very significant material for the Homeric audience. It may be a little strange to you, it may be a little distant from you, but it is something that the Homeric audience understood because they themselves believed in it. These are not literary devices or gimmicks, but they are part of the belief of the ancient audience. I think you should also keep this in mind when you're thinking about the gods in the Iliad and the Odyssey. These are not literary devices, but part of religious belief. It may be well to keep those ideas separate. Homer is not using the gods for literary purposes, but he is reflecting religious belief of his own, presumably, and of his audience. And this is true also of the omens, which appear in this particular part of the Odyssey, something which the audience will readily grasp and will understand their particular meaning and significance because they believe in them themselves. Now comes, following that, the test of the bow. The test of the bow, which is set by Penelope herself. She has brought out the old bow of Odysseus, the one which he had had as a gift, and which which traces its ancestry to Heracles. here's our old friend appearing again by reference here. And Heracles' Odysseus' bow now is brought out as a test by Penelope. And she says that she will marry whoever can string this bow and shoot from it. It is at this point that you have a drama fulfilling itself, the drama of Telemachus and the drama of Odysseus together. Telemachus we've seen in various stages of his growing up. And we have reached now the point at which he really takes his place beside his father. He has arrived at a new relationship with his mother, a relationship, as a matter of fact, that she, as it were, acknowledges. On page 343, a very nice passage, which Penelope speaks as once again she comes down into the main hall. Remember, it was such a circumstance in which Telemachus first had stood up to his mother and rebuked her and had declared the beginning of a new relationship. She seems on page 343, and there are others, I just chose this as a particularly good one. She speaks for Telemachus' ears alone and says, "Telemachus, what has come over you? Like-minded you were not in all your boyhood. Now you are full grown, come of age. A man from foreign parts might take you for the son of royalty to go by your good looks and have you no more thoughtfulness or manners. How could it happen in our hall that you permit the stranger to be so abused?" He's just been mocked more by the suitors. And here is the recognition on the part of Penelope of the new relationship, of her recognizing that Telemachus is now grown up. But he really proves it in the testing of the bow. And you recall that marvelous episode, that marvelous moment when Telemachus takes the bow of Odysseus and he strings it and is about to. He realizes after 2 tries that he is going to be able to shoot with the bow. And his father looks at him and shakes his head or nods, gives indication that this is not the time. But Telemachus has here grown up. He can string his father's bow and is ready now to take his place beside his father. And of course, this is what eventually he does. There is a sort of double meaning here that I'd like to point out. The testing of the bow is not merely a matter of the recognition that this is Odysseus. It becomes the great recognition moment for Odysseus and the suitors. But the testing with a bow is a marriage test. It has so been set by Penelope. And it would be improper then for Telemachus to pull the bow at this particular time. He is not the right person for it. So for other reasons besides the question of the recognition, by the ancient idea of the testing of the shooting of an arrow through a ring, which is in many of the Serbo-Croatian songs one of the marriage tests, in its way a symbolic test of virility because it has phallic and sexual implications. Telemachus is not the person now, not quite yet, to actually shoot the arrow through the axis. That is only for Telemachus or for the one who will marry Penelope. And so there is something of that element in the trial of the bow that I think you should be aware of as well. There is an old Turkish story which is about a hero called Bamsi Berek of the Gray Horse. Bamsi, B-A-M-S-I. It's a long story and I'm not going to go into it in any detail because it starts with the birth of Bamsi and goes up through his marriage, and at the time in which he is married that night he is captured, like Julie Gibrahi. And he is captured and taken away and he lies in prison for 16 years, a long period of time. And finally, there's some false news about his death reaches his family, reaches his wife's family, and they decide that the time is right for her to marry again. This is Lady Chichek. And Lady Chichek then is betrothed to another character. Bamsi's father is not satisfied with all this, and he sends out merchants to see if they can't possibly find Bamsi, and eventually they get to the place in which Bamsi is incarcerated, and they converse with one another through the window. They converse with one another in song, and Bamsi asks the kind of questions that Julie Gibrahim asks of the prisoner that has joined him. How is everything at home, etc., etc. And he finds out then that his wife is about to be married again, and he and his 39 companions contrive, with the help of the daughter of their captor, a little like the wife of the Ban in the Julie Gibrahim story, who has a parallel with Athena, you may remember. Well, she helps him get out of prison, Bamsi at any rate, if he will marry her later. They're pursued, and finally, as he gets towards home, he meets up with a minstrel, and he exchanges clothes with the minstrel and takes the minstrel's lute, L-U-T-E, a musical instrument. And in this disguise, he approaches home. He meets first with his little sister at a well, and then is brought to his older sisters, and he asks for a cloak to wear, and he puts on the cloak. They give him Berek's cloak, Bamsi's cloak, and the cloak fits him enormously well. And his sisters say, except for the luster in your eyes, I would say that you are Bamsi Berek. He sees the danger in this, and so throws off this kaftan, or cloak, and puts on a much humbler disguise, And with this disguise and pretending madness, he returns home. There he finds, and this is the important element, there he finds the suitors shooting with arrows, very much like this testing. He finds the part of the wedding games that are going on, the shooting of arrows, and Bamsey asks permission to shoot, and he, of course, wins over all of the other people. It's a strangely like and a good example of the use of the bow and the shooting of arrows as part of wedding games and as part of the testing of the bridegroom. Here in a 15th century Turkish manuscript from Central Siberia, as a matter of fact, from the Oghuz tribes, you find a very similar element. Well, he finally goes back, he's recognized by the ladies and eventually by his wife, and takes care of the suitor by burning him up, and thus is returned with retribution. But the reason I brought this in particularly, although the whole of it is a good parallel and is really connected with the Julie Gibrahim story, is for the element of the shooting of arrows with the bow and its proof as a trial of wedding and as a trial of the virility of the suitor of the bridegroom. There follows then, of course, in the Odyssey, the scene of carnage in which Odysseus, and he now has helped us. There have been some more recognitions. There have been the recognition by Eumaeus and Philoetius, the cattle herder and the swine herder in reverse order, a telling of them who he is because he has need of them, and the four of them, he and his son Telemachus, and these two now face the suitors. I said that the testing of the bow was an important element for Telemachus. It is, of course, an important element for Odysseus also, because not only is Telemachus maturing, but so is Odysseus. And the beginning with the testing of the bow and the carnage that follows up until the final recognition by the bed, Odysseus himself is coming to a second stage of maturity. You have a double maturing, that of Telemachus on the one hand, and that of Odysseus on the other, and the two are mingled together and meet together in the testing of the bow and the killing of the suitors, which follows this. There are many people who have been shocked by the brutality of the retribution that Odysseus metes out to the suitors and to others who have been unfaithful to him and to Telemachus and to Penelope in these years. But this is, and sometimes this has been thought of as a very primitive element which has come out and been preserved in Homer's Odyssey. This may well be true, But if you think of the brutality in the Iliad of the fighting there, the brutality of what Hector intends to do to the corpse of Patroclus, the mutilations, I don't think that this is out of character too much at any rate. So that all of those people who have been unfaithful are finally punished for this. And the time has come for the ritual recognition by Penelope. I don't need to elaborate on that because you know the story. There's only one thing. And she sits there in a very dramatic moment. She sits there silent and is rebuked by Telemachus for being so hard-hearted. Here, her husband is here at last. But there's still that one test that has to be met, and so she is waiting for the opportunity, and Homer is waiting now. And now, at last, he brings out the test of the bed that only Odysseus would know about. And so, there's all kinds of symbolism in that tree, one might say. In the tree and the bed, which has been, of which it is one of the main posts. And so the recognition takes place. And perhaps strangely, before they really meet together, he tells her the whole story of his wanderings. Perhaps a little out of place at this particular moment, but nevertheless, he goes through the adventures, beginning with the Cicones and so on, and you can check them off, and they're all there. And finally, they seek sweet love together. The last book of the Odyssey, there are many people who have thought, and Fitzgerald speaks of this, who have thought that the Odyssey should end with the marriage bed of Odysseus and Penelope. Many, at least two of the older Alexandrian critics had thought that the Odyssey ended with, I think it's line 296 of book 23. And so they have thought that the 24th book was an addition and really didn't belong to the Odyssey. I think this is quite wrong because there are elements in the 24th book which are very important, and they tie the Odyssey together with the Iliad and finish the actions which have been foreseen throughout the Odyssey. Now, you remember the 24th book begins with the journey with the taking of the spirits of the dead suitors by Hermes down to Hades. And there they meet together with Agamemnon and Achilles. Here is a marvelous scene of a dialogue, conversation between Agamemnon and Achilles. And we are reminded not only back to book 11, where Odysseus had seen them in the land of the dead, but also of the fact that the parallel with the story of Agamemnon has held throughout the Odyssey, and had been there at the very beginning. So it is fitting at the end to bring in Agamemnon once again. And it's almost as if, this is perhaps a little bold, but at any rate, it's almost as if Homer had dictated the Iliad, he had dictated the Odyssey, and here at the end he was tying both of these together with a discussion between Achilles and Agamemnon about fate of man, about glory, about death, and so on. It is almost as if this is an ending of both the Iliad and the Odyssey by the master poet who has just almost reached the end of telling the story, of telling